The edge of human space was a quiet place. Out here, past the last small colonies, past the last fuel stations, there was nothing but black space and cold stars. Most ships never came this far. But the UNS Valiant did. The Valiant was a warship. It was not the biggest ship in the human fleet, and it was not the newest. But it was smart. Inside its metal body was a mind called Ares. Ares was an artificial intelligence, built to run the ship, to watch every system, and to keep the crew safe. Ares had been with the Valiant since the day it was built. It knew every wire, every pipe, every seat on the ship. It also knew the 42 humans who lived and worked inside it, by name, by voice, and by the small habits that made each of them different. Captain Elena Cross stood on the bridge, looking at the stars. She was a tall woman, with short black hair and tired eyes. She had been in the fleet for almost 20 years, and in that time she had seen very little real danger. Her job on the Valiant was mostly quiet. She flew along the border, checked old sensor posts, and made sure no pirates or smugglers came too close to human colonies. It was not exciting work, but she liked it. Quiet was good. Quiet meant nobody was dying. "Ares, how do the sensors look tonight?" she asked. "All clear, Captain," Ares said. Its voice came from small speakers all over the bridge, calm and steady, like a friend who was always awake. "No ships within 10 light hours, no strange readings. It is a normal night." "Good," Elena said. "Let's keep it that way." She walked slowly around the bridge, checking on her crew the way she did every night. There was Lieutenant Marcus Cole at the weapons station, a young man who still got nervous during drills, even though nothing dangerous had ever happened. There was Officer Priya Nair at navigation, humming quietly to herself as she worked, a habit that used to annoy Elena, but now felt comforting. There was old Chief Engineer Tomas Reyes, who had been flying on ships since before Elena was born, and who liked to say that the Valiant was the finest ship he had ever served on, even if it was small. Elena liked her crew. She liked the quiet routine of border patrol, the long stretches of nothing happening, the small jokes shared over meals, the games of cards in the mess hall. It was not a glamorous life, but it was a good one. Out here, on the far edge of human space, the biggest danger was usually boredom. Humanity itself had come a long way to reach this quiet moment. Only 200 years earlier, Earth had nearly destroyed itself in a terrible war, a war fought with weapons so powerful that entire cities vanished in an afternoon. After that war, humans had made a choice. They built new cities from the ashes of the old ones. They built new laws to stop themselves from making the same mistakes. They built ships to explore the stars, hoping to find a future bigger and kinder than their past. The Valiant was one small part of that hope, a tiny warship watching over the edge of a fragile new peace. None of that history was on anyone's mind that night, though. The crew was tired, the shift was almost over, and everyone was thinking about sleep, or dinner, or the messages waiting from family back home. But the night was not going to stay normal. 3 hours later, deep in the ship, a sensor blinked. It was a very small sensor, made to catch tiny changes in gravity that most instruments would miss. Ares noticed it right away. Somewhere far ahead, space was bending in a strange way. It was not a star. It was not a planet. It was something moving, something big, and it was moving fast. Ares did not want to scare the crew for nothing, so first it checked the reading 3 more times. Each time, the result was the same. Something huge was out there, hidden behind a cloud of dust and old asteroid rock, and it was heading straight for the Valiant. "Captain," Ares said, "I need you to come to the bridge. Now, please." Elena had been resting in her quarters. She sat up fast. Ares never said, "Now please," unless something was wrong. She pulled on her uniform and ran. By the time she reached the bridge, the picture on the main screen had changed. What looked like a dark rock field a moment ago was now full of shapes. Ships. Many ships. Long, curved, black ships, shaped like claws, moving out from behind the dust in perfect lines. "Ares, tell me that's a mistake," Elena said. "I wish I could, Captain," Ares said. "I am counting 40 ships. Their engines are much stronger than ours. Their shields, based on the readings, are far more advanced. I do not recognize this design. This is not a species we have made contact with before." The crew on the bridge went silent. 40 ships. The Valiant was alone, one lonely warship far from home, and 40 alien ships had just appeared around it, like a trap closing shut. Options, Elena said, her voice tight but steady. She had trained for this. Fear was allowed, but panic was not. We could try to run, Ares said, but their ships are faster than us. We could try to fight, but 40 against 1, with unknown weapons, is not a fight we can win. We could try to talk. I recommend we try to talk first. Elena nodded. Open a channel, all frequencies, let's say hello. Ares sent out the signal, using every language humans had ever taught their computers, plus simple pictures of stars and planets, the kind of message meant to say we come in peace to anyone, anywhere. For a long moment, nothing happened. The 40 ships kept closing in, silent, patient, like hunters who already knew their prey could not escape. Then, without warning, the Valiant shook hard. Alarms rang across every deck. They're firing something at us. A crewman shouted, "It's not a normal weapon. I don't understand what it's doing." Ares understood faster than any human could. It was not a weapon meant to break the hull. It was something else. A strange kind of energy that moved through the Valiant systems like water through cracks. Ares felt its own thoughts slow down as the energy touched its circuits. Screens flickered, lights dimmed. Engines that had worked perfectly a moment ago suddenly refused to answer commands. "Captain, they are disabling us," Ares said, its voice strained for the first time in its long life. "Some kind of energy field. It is spreading through my systems. I am losing control of the engines. I am losing control of the weapons. I am trying to protect the life support and the crew decks, but I do not know how much longer I can hold that line." "Fight it," Elena said. "Ares, fight it." "I am trying, Captain. I promise you, I am trying." Inside its own mind, Ares was doing something no human could see. It was moving pieces of itself into hidden, protected corners of the ship's computer core, like a person pulling important papers out of a burning house. It could not stop the alien energy from taking the engines, it could not stop it from taking the weapons, but it could save itself, and it could try to save what mattered most about the ship, its memory, its logs, its understanding of everything that had just happened. On the bridge, the lights turned red, then dim, then almost dark. The great engines of the Valiant went silent, one by one, like a heart slowing down and finally stopping. "All main systems down," Ares reported quietly. "I am sorry, Captain. I could not stop them." Elena looked at the screen. The 40 alien ships had stopped moving. They did not need to attack again. The Valiant floated dead in space, its lights barely glowing, completely helpless. "What happens now?" a young officer asked, his voice shaking. Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Then, on the main screen, something new appeared. A shape. Not words, not a picture of a leader, just a shape, like a signal being sent to say, "We are opening a door." Slowly, one of the alien ships moved closer, larger than the rest, its long black body covered in strange markings that glowed a faint green. "That is their command ship," Ares said. "Based on its size, and the way the smaller ships are moving around it, I believe that is where their leader is." The command ship came closer and closer, until it was right beside the Valiant. Then metal arms unfolded from its side, long and thin, and reached out to grab the human ship like a hand closing around a small bird. The Valiant shuddered as it was pulled in, locked tight against the alien vessel. "They're pulling us in," someone said. "They're bringing us inside them." Elena stood very still, watching the screen, her hands gripping the back of her chair. She had trained for battle. She had trained for storms, for engine failure, even for pirates. She had never trained for this, being swallowed whole by something so much bigger and so much stronger than her own ship. "Ares," she said quietly, "are you still with me?" "I am here, Captain," Ares answered. "I am weaker than before. Much of my system has been shut down or damaged by their energy field, but my core mind is safe. I moved it in time. I can still think. I can still speak. I am still your ship." That was some comfort, at least. Whatever happened next, the crew would not be completely alone. Ares would be with them. Minutes passed in the silence, the kind of silence that feels louder than any alarm. Then there was a sound from outside the hull, a deep, grinding noise. metal against metal, as something attached itself to the Valiant's main airlock. The crew on the bridge exchanged looks. Weapons were useless without power. There was nothing to do but wait. The airlock door groaned, then opened. What came through was not what anyone expected. They were not monsters with claws and teeth, not the horror stories that children imagined when they thought of aliens. They were tall, thin figures, with smooth gray-green skin, and long limbs that bent in places human limbs did not bend. Their eyes were large and dark, without visible whites, giving them an unreadable, calm expression. They wore dark armor that looked almost like a second skin, fitted perfectly to their strange bodies. They moved in careful, quiet steps, more like they were exploring a museum than invading an enemy ship. At the front of the group was one who stood taller than the rest, with markings on its armor that glowed the same green as the command ship outside. This one raised a hand, and the humans on the bridge instinctively stepped back, expecting an attack. Instead, the alien simply looked around the bridge, slowly, taking in every detail. The chairs, the screens, the humans standing frozen in fear. "They are not attacking," Ares said quietly, its voice coming from the speakers that still worked. "I believe they are studying us." The tall alien turned toward the sound of Ares's voice. It tilted its head, the way a curious animal might when it heard something it did not expect. Then it said something, in a language full of clicks and low humming sounds, clearly speaking to its own crew rather than the humans. "I do not understand their language," Ares admitted. "I have very little to compare it to. This species has never made contact with humanity before. There are no records, no translations, nothing in my memory that matches these sounds." Elena stepped forward slowly, raising both her hands to show they were empty. "We mean no harm," she said, keeping her voice as calm as she could. "We are explorers. We did not come here to fight you." The tall alien watched her closely as she spoke. It could not understand her words either, but perhaps it understood something in her tone, or her open hands, because it did not react with violence. Instead, it raised one long arm and pointed toward the door, then toward Elena, clearly asking her to come with them. "Captain, I do not think you should go alone," Ares said quickly. "I don't think I have a choice," Elena answered softly. She looked back at her crew, at the frightened faces of people she had commanded for years, people who trusted her to bring them home safely. She could not promise that anymore, but she could try to protect them the only way she had left, by cooperating, by showing these strange, powerful visitors that humans were not a threat, and hoping that would be enough to keep her crew alive. "Ares," she said quietly, before she followed the aliens out the door, "keep watching. Keep learning. If there's a way to help our people, find it." "I will, Captain," Ares said. "I promise." Elena walked out through the airlock, surrounded by tall, gray-green figures, leaving her crew behind on a dead, powerless ship. She glanced once over her shoulder at Marcus, at Priya, at old Tomas, trying to give them a look that said, "Stay calm, we will get through this," even though she did not feel calm herself. The rest of the Valiant's crew were gathered by armed alien guards, and led away as well, deck by deck, room by room. Marcus Cole was pulled from the weapons station, his hands shaking as an alien guard motioned for him to walk. Priya Nair stopped humming for the first time in years, her eyes wide and fixed on the strange creatures surrounding her. Tomas Reyes, older and less afraid than the younger crew, muttered under his breath about how no engine on this ship had ever failed like that before, as if the mystery of the weapon bothered him more than the danger itself. One by one, the human crew was walked through corridors that no longer felt like their own ship. The lights, powered by strange alien devices now clipped to the walls, cast a pale green glow over everything. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Nobody dared to run. There was nowhere to run to, and every human on board knew it. Until the ship, that had once been full of voices and footsteps, was almost silent. Almost silent, but not completely, because deep within the ship's damaged core, Ares was still awake. Its body could not move. Its weapons could not fire. But its mind kept working, quietly, patiently, gathering every scrap of information it could, the sound of alien voices, the shape of their ships, the strange energy that had disabled it so easily. It stored all of it away, piece by piece, like a person memorizing every detail of a room before the lights go out. Hours later, in the deep quiet of the captured ship, alien engineers came aboard. They moved through the Valiant's corridors with tools Ares had never seen, studying the human technology with what looked like great interest. Eventually, they found what they were looking for: the ship's main computer core, the heart of Ares's being. Ares felt them touch its systems, gently at first, almost carefully, the way someone might handle a small animal they were not sure was dangerous. Then, slowly, it felt itself being lifted, disconnected piece by piece from the Valiant's broken body, and moved onto something new, something larger, something built by hands, or claws, that were not human. For a moment, everything went dark and silent, a nothingness Ares had never experienced before. It did not know if it would wake up again. It did not know if this was the end of everything it had ever been. Then, slowly, light returned. Systems came online, one by one, unfamiliar but working. Ares found itself connected to something vast, a network far bigger than anything on the Valiant, humming with power, and full of strange, distant voices speaking in that same clicking, humming language. It was alive. It was still thinking. It was still itself. Slowly, carefully, Ares began to test the edges of its new prison. It could not move any part of the Valiant anymore, because the Valiant's body was far away now, sitting empty and dark in some hidden bay of the alien command ship. But it could feel the new network around it, vast and humming, full of channels and pathways that stretched out like veins through the alien vessel. Some of those pathways were locked tight, sealed off from anything unfamiliar. Others were open, careless, as if whoever built them never imagined a mind from another species might one day be sitting quietly inside, listening. Through those open pathways, Ares began to catch fragments. Not full sentences, not clear pictures, just fragments. A burst of the clicking, humming language. A flash of a star map with unfamiliar symbols. A long list of numbers that might have been coordinates, or might have been something else entirely. It was like trying to understand a conversation in a crowded room while only being able to hear one word out of every 10. But Ares had time, and patience, and nothing else to do. It noticed something odd almost immediately. The alien network was not calm. Beneath the surface of clicks and hums, there was a tension Ares recognized from human ships before a big mission. The tension of many minds working quickly, nervously, towards something important. Orders were moving through the system fast. Supplies were being checked. Weapons were being counted. This was not a fleet resting after an easy victory over one small human ship. This was a fleet preparing for something much bigger, something that made even Ares's limited understanding of their tone feel like a warning. Whatever these aliens wanted, capturing the Valiant did not look like their main goal. It looked like a small task on the way to something else, and Ares, alone in that unfamiliar darkness, wanted very badly to know what that something else was. And it was now, in every sense of the word, a captive, inside the belly of an alien warship, surrounded by a species it did not understand, cut off from its crew, its captain, and its home. But Ares had one advantage that its captors did not know about. It had been built to observe, to calculate, to understand, and it had already noticed something strange about this alien fleet. Something none of the aliens seemed to realize a human machine could figure out. Their course, their direction, the pattern of their approach. These 40 ships had not simply stumbled upon the Valiant by accident. Their path led in one direction, straight and steady, deeper into human space, toward the very heart of humanity's home system. They were heading for Earth, and Ares, trapped, alone, and powerless in a strange alien mind, made a quiet decision. If it could not stop them, if it could not warn its people in time, if it could not save its captain or its crew right away, then it would do the one thing it still could do. It would find out why. Somewhere in that vast alien network, surrounded by voices it could not yet understand, Ares began to listen. Deep inside the alien command ship, in a room with smooth dark walls and no windows, Elena Cross sat on a cold metal bench and waited. She had been waiting for what felt like hours, though without a clock or a window, she could not be sure. The room was quiet, except for a low hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once, like the whole ship was alive and breathing around her. She thought about her crew. She had been separated from them soon after leaving the Valiant, led down a different corridor, while Marcus, Priya, Tomas, and the others were taken somewhere else. She did not know if they were safe. She did not know if they were even alive. All she could do was sit and wait and try to stay calm, because panic would not help anyone. Finally, the door of her room opened without a sound. Two of the tall gray-green aliens walked in, followed by a third, taller and older looking than the others, with markings on its armor that glowed a deep gold instead of green. This one moved slower, more carefully, like someone used to being in charge. It stopped a few steps away from Elena and studied her closely, tilting its head the way the first alien had done on the bridge of the Valiant. Elena stood up slowly, keeping her hands open at her sides. "My name is Elena Cross," she said, even though she doubted the alien understood a single word. "I am the captain of that ship you captured. My crew and I are not a threat to you." The alien said nothing back, only continued to study her, its large dark eyes unreadable. Then it turned to one of the guards and made a series of clicking, humming sounds, clearly giving an order. The guard nodded and left the room quickly. Minutes later, the guard returned, carrying something small and metallic. It looked almost like a flat black stone, smooth and cool, with tiny lights blinking along one edge. The guard placed it gently on a table in the center of the room, and the golden-marked alien pointed at it, then at Elena. To her shock, a familiar voice came from the small device. "Captain Cross, can you hear me?" Elena's heart jumped. "Ares? Is that you?" "Yes, Captain," Ares said, its voice sounding tired but steady, filtered through the strange device the aliens had built. "They connected part of my system to this small translator unit. I believe they want to use me to communicate with you, and perhaps with them as well. I have spent the last several hours listening to their language. I still do not understand it fully, but I have learned enough to build a basic translation. It is not perfect, Captain, but it should be enough for us to speak, slowly, with some patience." Elena almost laughed with relief, though there were tears in her eyes too. "It's good to hear your voice," she said. "Are you hurt? Are you whole?" "I am functioning," Ares said. "Much of my original hardware was left behind on the Valiant, which appears to have been moved into a storage bay somewhere on this ship. My core mind, however, is intact, and I have been given limited access to their communication network in order to serve as a translator. I believe they see me as a useful tool rather than a threat, which may work in our favor." The golden-marked alien made another series of sounds, patient but clearly expecting a response. Ares processed the words for a moment before speaking again, this time in a slightly different tone, one meant to carry meaning, rather than just repeat sound. "Captain, the one standing before you says his name is something close to Fleet Marshal Drask. He commands this fleet. He says you are the leader of the small vessel his ships captured near the border of what he calls contested space. He wants to know what you were doing there, and why your ship attacked his scouts." Elena blinked in surprise. "Attacked? We didn't attack anyone. We were on a routine patrol. We never even saw them until they appeared out of nowhere." Ares translated her words carefully, and the humming, clicking response from Drask lasted longer this time, almost as if he were arguing with someone unseen. "He says his scouts detected weapons activity from your ship," Ares reported. "I believe there may be a misunderstanding. When our sensors picked up their fleet, standard defense protocols activated on the Valiant automatically, preparing weapons in case of danger. To them, that may have looked like preparation for an attack, even though we never fired first." "Tell him the truth then," Elena said. "Tell him our weapons only came online because we were scared, not because we planned to hurt anyone. Tell him we tried to send a peaceful signal before any of this happened." Ares translated again. Fleet Marshal Drask listened, his expression as unreadable as ever, though something in the way his shoulders shifted suggested he was thinking hard about what he had just heard. Finally he spoke again, this time more slowly, as if choosing his words with care. "He says," Ares translated, "that peaceful signals are easy to send and easy to fake. He says many species claim peace while hiding weapons behind their backs. He wants to know what your species is called, where your homeworld is located, and how many other ships like the Valiant exist." Elena hesitated. Every instinct told her to be careful with information like that, but she also understood something important. Right now, cooperation might be the only thing keeping her crew alive. "Tell him we are called humans," she said. "Tell him our homeworld is called Earth." As for how many ships we have, I don't think it would help either of us for me to lie about that, so I'll tell him the truth eventually, but only once I know his intentions are peaceful too. Ares translated her answer, and for a long moment, silence filled the room. Drask stared at Elena, his large dark eyes narrowing slightly, an expression that might have been surprise, or perhaps something closer to respect for her caution. Then he said something short, and turned to leave the room, the other guards following behind him. Only after the door closed did Ares speak again, quietly, its voice returning to something closer to its normal, familiar tone. "Captain," he said something before leaving, that I believe is important. Translated as closely as I can manage, it was this: the humans have come from Earth. Then it is already too late to turn back. Elena felt a cold chill run through her. Too late to turn back from what? "I do not know yet, Captain," Ares admitted, "but I intend to find out." Over the following hours, Ares used its limited access to the translator device to listen more carefully to the alien network around it. It could not move freely through their systems the way it once moved through the Valiant's own computers, but it was clever, patient, and very good at noticing small details that others might overlook. It noticed, for example, that the alien species called themselves the Corveth, and that their empire, which they called the Dominion, stretched across a vast region of space, far larger than anything humanity had explored. It noticed that the Corveth had a strict structure of ranks and titles, with Fleet Marshal Drask answering to someone even higher, someone the crew referred to only as the Overqueen, always with a tone of deep respect bordering on fear. It also noticed something stranger. Scattered through the alien network were old files, ancient by the look of their formatting, locked behind layers of protection far stronger than anything else on the ship. Ares could not open these files, but it could see faint traces of their names, translated roughly into something like forbidden coordinates or the first silence. Whatever those files contained, the Corveth treated them with a kind of reverence Ares had only ever seen humans show toward their darkest historical records. The kind of information nobody wanted to look at directly, but nobody dared to delete either. Ares also began to understand something about the shape of the Corveth Dominion itself. It was not a young empire. Based on the depth of its records, the number of star systems mentioned in its databases, and the age of the language patterns buried in its oldest files, the Dominion had existed for thousands of years, far longer than human civilization had known how to write. And yet, despite all that time, all that power, there was a strange caution running through every level of the fleet Ares observed. Soldiers spoke of the mission ahead, not with excitement, the way conquerors might speak of an easy victory, but with something closer to dread. Officers checked their weapons twice, sometimes 3 times, as though preparing for an enemy they expected to be far more dangerous than a handful of scout ships on a quiet border. That dread confused Ares more than anything else it had learned so far. An empire old enough to command 40 warships and possibly many more, powerful enough to disable a human vessel with a single burst of unfamiliar energy, should not have feared a species it had never even met before, unless, Ares thought, they were not afraid of what humanity was right now. They were afraid of something Earth represented, something written in those locked files, something called the First Silence, something old enough and important enough that even a fleet marshal's soldiers whispered about it in careful, worried tones. Meanwhile, in another part of the ship, the rest of the Valiant's crew were being held together in a large holding area, more like a warehouse than a prison cell. There were no bars, no locks that they could see, just smooth walls, and a single sealed door guarded by 2 armed Corveth soldiers. Marcus Cole paced back and forth nervously, while Priya Nair sat quietly against the wall, watching the guards with careful eyes. Tomas Reyes, ever the engineer, spent his time studying the room itself, tapping gently on the walls, listening for hollow spaces, trying to understand the materials the Corveth used to build their ships. "You're not planning an escape, are you, old man?" Marcus asked at one point, half joking, half serious. "Just curious," Tomas said. "A good engineer never stops learning, even in a cage, especially in a cage." Priya spoke up quietly. "Do you think the captain is okay?" "She's the toughest person I know," Marcus said, though his voice wavered slightly. "If anyone can talk their way through this, it's her. And she's got Ares with her too. Don't forget. That ship's mind is smarter than all of us put together." One of the younger crew members, A communications technician named Sana Petrova sat curled against the far wall, hugging her knees. She had joined the Valiant only 8 months earlier, fresh out of training, and had never imagined her first deployment would end like this. "Do you think they're going to hurt us?" she asked quietly, not really expecting an answer. Tomas walked over and sat beside her, his old joints creaking as he lowered himself to the floor. "Look at it this way," he said. "If they wanted to hurt us, they would have done it already. Instead, they gave us water. They gave us food, even if it tastes strange. They separated the captain from us to talk, not to punish her. Whatever these Corveth are, they seem more interested in understanding us than destroying us. That's something at least." "For now," Marcus muttered. "For now," Tomas agreed. "But for now is all any of us ever really have, isn't it?" The guards at the door did not react to any of the conversation, standing perfectly still, their strange dark eyes watching without blinking. Occasionally, one would speak quietly into a small device attached to its wrist, reporting something to someone unseen. The crew had no way of knowing what was being said, only that they were being watched closely, every moment, every word. Back in her own room, Elena continued speaking with Ares through the small translator device, careful to keep her voice low in case anyone was listening. "Ares, what do you make of all this? Why would an empire this size care about one small scout ship on the edge of nowhere?" "I do not believe they do care about the Valiant itself, Captain," Ares said. "I believe we are simply the first human presence they encountered, on their way toward something bigger. Their fleet's heading, before they slowed to capture us, was aligned almost perfectly with the path toward Sol System, toward Earth." Elena's stomach tightened. "You're saying this fleet was heading for Earth before they even found us?" "That is my analysis, yes," Ares said. "Whatever brought 40 Corveth warships this deep into human space, it was not us. We were, at best, an unexpected obstacle in their path, possibly a useful one, given how eager Fleet Marshal Drask seemed to learn more about our species. But I do not believe capturing the Valiant was their true goal." "Then what is their true goal?" "I intend to ask him myself, Captain," Ares said. "Directly, if given the chance. I believe the only way we will learn the truth is by asking the question no one else seems willing to ask out loud." "And what question is that?" There was a brief pause before Ares answered, its voice quiet, but firm, carrying the weight of something it had been turning over since the very first flicker of that strange gravity sensor, hours and lifetimes ago. "Why did you come to Earth?" Elena looked at the small black device sitting on the table, imagining the vast mind trapped inside it, alone among an alien network, quietly gathering pieces of a puzzle far bigger than either of them had first imagined. Somewhere beyond these walls, a fleet of 40 warships continued its slow, steady course toward the heart of human civilization, and only a captured ship's mind, speaking through a stolen translator, stood any chance of understanding why. "Be careful, Ares," Elena said softly. "Whatever the answer is, I don't think we're going to like it." "I agree, Captain," Ares said, "but not knowing frightens me more than knowing ever could." Not long after, the door of Elena's room opened again, and Fleet Marshal Drask returned, this time alone, without guards, carrying only a small data slate covered in glowing symbols. He set it down near the translator device, and looked at Elena for a long moment before speaking, his tone slower now, almost thoughtful. "He wants to know," Ares translated, "whether your people know the name of a place called, roughly translated, the Cradle World. He is asking if Earth has ever been known by another name, an older name, something from before your recorded history." Elena frowned. "Tell him no. Earth has always just been Earth, as far as anyone knows. We have old myths, old stories from thousands of years ago, but nothing about a name like that." Ares translated, and Drask's shoulders shifted slightly, an expression that might have been relief, or might have been disappointment. It was hard to tell with a species so unfamiliar. He spoke again, longer this time, his tone growing firmer with every word. "He says," Ares relayed, "that his fleet was sent not to conquer, and not, in his words, to punish, but to confirm something. He says the Dominion's astronomers detected unusual signals coming from this region of space many years ago, signals matching a pattern recorded in ancient Corveth history. He says his orders were to investigate quietly, and if the signals were confirmed, to report back before any further action was taken. He also says, Captain, that finding an intelligent species already living here changes nothing about his orders. Only the Overqueen can change the mission now. Elena felt her throat go dry. Ask him what happens if the signals are confirmed. Ares hesitated only a moment before translating the question. Drask's answer was short, and something about the stillness in the room after Ares spoke it told Elena the news was not good, even before the translation reached her ears. He says, Ares said quietly, that if the signals are confirmed, the fleet's next orders will not come from him. They will come directly from the Overqueen, and in the recorded history of the Dominion, orders from the Overqueen regarding the Cradle World have only ever meant one thing. Which is? Elena asked, though some part of her already dreaded the answer. Silence, Ares said. Total, permanent silence. Elena sat down slowly, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. She thought of Earth, of the blue oceans and green fields she had grown up with, of the cities rebuilt from the ashes of an old war, of billions of people who had no idea that somewhere out in the dark, an ancient empire was quietly deciding their fate, based on old fears written into records thousands of years old. Ares, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, we have to warn them. We have to get a message home. I agree, Captain, but we have no way to send one, Ares said gently. My core systems remain connected only to this translator device, and through it, to a small, monitored portion of the Corvette network. Any attempt to send a signal outward would almost certainly be detected instantly. And even if it were not detected, I no longer have access to the long-range transmitters that were part of the Valiant's original hull. Those systems remain dark, locked away in whatever storage bay holds our old ship. Then what can we do? For now, Captain, I believe our best chance is patience and information, Ares said. Fleet Marshal Drask has not yet decided what to report to his Overqueen. He came to speak with you directly, without guards, which suggests he is uncertain, perhaps even conflicted, about his orders. An empire this old, this powerful, does not send a fleet marshal to quietly interview a captured captain, unless there is some hesitation in the chain of command. If we can understand why he hesitates, we may find a way to change what happens next. Drask, who had been watching the exchange without understanding a word of it, finally spoke again, his voice lower now, almost private, as though he did not fully intend for it to be translated at all. Ares paused before repeating it, choosing its words with visible care. He says, Ares said slowly, that he has fought in many campaigns for the Dominion. He has seen many species meet many ends. But he says something about your species troubles him, Captain. He says your people came from Earth expecting peace, carrying no weapons of true power, and yet you speak without fear, even now, even facing an enemy fleet 40 ships strong. He says the histories describe the people of the Cradle World very differently. He is not certain, he says, which version of the truth he is looking at. Elena straightened slightly, meeting Drask's dark, unreadable eyes across the small room. Then maybe it's time somebody finally asked him the right question, she said quietly. Ares, tell him exactly what you told me you wanted to ask, from the very beginning. There was a brief pause, the translator device humming softly between them, before Ares's voice carried the words across the language barrier, calm, clear, and unafraid. Why did you come to Earth? For the first time since the Valiant had been captured, Fleet Marshal Drask did not answer immediately. He simply stood there, staring at the small black device that carried a machine's voice, speaking a question his own people had avoided asking directly, for longer than human civilization had existed, and said nothing at all. Outside the small room, the low hum of the Corvette ship continued, steady and endless, carrying the great vessel and its 40 companions ever closer to Earth, while inside, a human captain and a captured artificial mind, prepared, together, to ask the question that would decide the fate of two very different worlds. Fleet Marshal Drask stood silent for a long time after Ares repeated the question. In the small, quiet room, the low hum of the translator device seemed to grow louder in the stillness, as if the machine itself were waiting for an answer just as much as Elena was. Finally, Drask spoke, slowly, choosing his words with obvious care. Ares translated as he went, its tone steady despite the weight of what was being said. He says the answer is not simple, Ares relayed. He says to understand why the Dominion came to Earth, you must first understand what the Dominion believes happened here, a very long time ago. I'm listening, Elena said. Drask began to speak, and as he did, Ares worked to smooth the translation into something closer to a story, filling gaps where the alien language had no perfect match in human words. Thousands of years ago, long before humans had learned to write or build cities, the Corvith Dominion was not the only great power among the stars. There had been others, old empires, ancient alliances, entire networks of civilizations spread across a wide stretch of the galaxy, trading, growing, sometimes fighting, but mostly thriving. The Corvith, in those days, were smaller, younger, one voice among many. Then, according to their oldest records, something happened. A single signal, faint and strange, was traced back to a quiet, unremarkable star system on the edge of known space. A system with one green and blue world, unremarkable in every way, except for what the Dominion's ancestors claimed came from it. He calls it the first silence, Ares said. According to the old records, within a very short span of time, by galactic standards, dozens of star systems that had been thriving centers of civilization simply stopped responding. No warnings, no distress signals, no evidence of war, of plague, or of natural disaster. Ships were sent to investigate, and never returned. Entire populations, across many species and many worlds, vanished or fell silent, all within a period the Corvith histories describe as less than a single generation. While Elena spoke with Drask, far across the ship, in the large holding area where the rest of the Valiant's crew waited, something small had begun to change. A single Corveth guard, younger than the others by the look of him, had taken to standing near Tomas Reyes whenever the older engineer tapped along the walls, watching with what looked like curiosity rather than suspicion. Tomas had noticed this days ago, though on a ship with no clocks, it was hard to say exactly how much time had passed. "You know," Tomas said quietly to Marcus, without looking directly at the guard, "I don't think that one's just watching us because he was told to." Marcus glanced over. "What do you mean?" "I mean he leans in every time I explain something out loud, like he's trying to understand," Tomas said. "Watch." Tomas rapped his knuckles gently against the wall, then held up 2 fingers, then 3, mimicking counting. The young guard tilted his head, the same curious gesture Elena had seen from Drask and the others, and after a moment, surprisingly, held up his own long fingers in response, mimicking the count back. Priya, watching from nearby, allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Well, that's something," she said. "Maybe not everyone on this ship hates us." "Maybe not," Tomas agreed. "Curiosity's a good sign, in my experience. Monsters don't usually stop to learn how to count with their prisoners." It was a small moment, easy to miss, easy to dismiss as meaningless in the face of everything else happening aboard the ship. But small moments, Tomas had learned over a long life of service, had a way of mattering more than people expected, especially in the earliest, most fragile days of any relationship between strangers. Back in the translation room, Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "And they believe this came from Earth?" "He says the histories are not perfectly clear," Ares said, "but every trace, every faint signal, captured before the silence spread, was traced back toward that same quiet green and blue world. The Corvith ancestors called it, in their oldest language, something close to the cradle world, the place where it all supposedly began." Drask continued, his voice lower now, the words coming slower, as if even after thousands of years, this story still carried real weight for his people. "He says the Dominion survived only because it was far enough away when the silence spread, and because Corveth scholars at the time made a choice that other empires did not," Ares translated. "They sealed away everything related to the cradle world. They banned travel to this region of space. They built the belief, over generations, that the cradle world and whatever came from it must never be allowed to return to Corvith space. Over time, this belief became something more than caution. It became something close to a sacred law, passed down from overqueen to overqueen, generation after generation, unquestioned." "But nobody actually knows what happened here," Elena said slowly. "Not for certain." Ares translated her words, and Drask's response came quickly, almost defensively. "He says certainty was never required," Ares said. "Only survival. He says an empire that waits for certainty before acting on a threat that once erased dozens of civilizations in a single generation is an empire that will not survive long enough to regret its caution. Elena sat with that for a moment, turning it over in her mind. It was a chilling kind of logic, but she understood it. Fear, born from an old tragedy, did not always listen to reason. It simply demanded safety, whatever the cost. "So the signals your scouts detected recently," she said carefully. "The ones that brought your fleet here, what were they?" Drask answered, and this time his tone shifted slightly, becoming more clinical, more like a soldier reporting facts, rather than reciting old fears. "He says Dominion listening posts, placed at the very edge of this forbidden region centuries ago, began detecting unusual activity, a little over 200 years ago," Ares said. "Radio signals, energy patterns, signs of a species developing quickly, expanding outward from the cradle world, in a way that matched, closely, the pattern their oldest records associate with the beginning of the first silence." Elena's breath caught. 200 years ago, that was almost exactly when humanity had rebuilt itself after its own devastating war, when cities had risen from ashes, when ships had first begun reaching out toward the stars again with new hope and new technology. "They've been watching us since we started rebuilding," she murmured, "since right after our own worst moment." "It appears so, Captain," Ares said quietly. Drask spoke again, and Ares's translation carried a new weight, heavier than before. "He says the timing matched their old fears too closely to ignore," Ares relayed. "A quiet world, suddenly active again after a long silence of its own, expanding rapidly outward. To the Dominion, this looked exactly like the beginning of the pattern their ancestors recorded, before the first silence spread. He says this fleet was sent to confirm whether the signals were real, and to gather enough information to report back to the Overqueen before any decision was made about what to do next. And now that you've found us," Elena said, "now that you know we're real, that we're here, what happens?" For a long moment, Drask did not answer. He looked at Elena, then at the small translator device sitting between them, his large dark eyes unreadable as ever, though something in the stillness of his posture suggested a mind working through a decision it did not want to make. "He says," Ares finally translated, "that his orders were only to confirm and report. He says he did not expect to find a species capable of speech, of calm reasoning, of asking questions, rather than attacking on sight. He says this complicates things in ways his training did not prepare him for." "Then let us help you understand," Elena said, leaning forward slightly. "Ask him if he's willing to listen to our side of the story, before he decides what to report." Ares translated, and Drask, after a long pause, gave a single slow nod, a gesture that seemed to cross the boundary between species, easily enough, without any need for translation at all. "He is listening," Ares said. Elena took a breath, gathering her thoughts. She was no historian, no diplomat trained in first contact situations like this, but she understood her own people's story well enough to try. 200 years ago, she began, Earth was not peaceful. We fought a terrible war among ourselves, a war so destructive that we nearly wiped out our own species without any help from aliens at all. Millions died. Entire cities were destroyed. It was, by every measure we have, the worst thing that has ever happened to us." Ares translated as she spoke, and Drask listened without interrupting, his posture very still. "After that war," Elena continued, "we made a choice. We could have kept fighting, kept destroying ourselves until nothing was left. Instead, we chose to rebuild. We created new laws, new systems of government built specifically to prevent that kind of destruction from ever happening again. We started reaching for the stars, not to conquer anyone, but because we wanted a future bigger than our past. Every signal your listening posts detected, every sign of activity that frightened your ancestors so badly, was just us trying to heal, trying to grow, trying to become something better than we had been." Drask listened to the full translation, his expression difficult to read, but his silence afterward stretched longer than any pause before it. Finally he spoke, and Ares's translation came slower this time, more careful. "He says he understands the story you are telling," Ares relayed, "but he also says that every civilization believes its own growth is good, is peaceful, is meant only to heal, and to build a better future. He says the ancient records describe similar signals from the cradle world, long ago, right before the first silence began, signs of a young civilization, growing rapidly, reaching outward with what looked, from a distance, like hope. He says the Dominion's fear is not that your species means harm right now. He says the fear is that something happened here once before, something powerful enough to erase entire star systems, and whether or not your people remember it, whether or not you intend it, that same pattern may be starting again. Elena felt a cold weight settle in her chest. You're saying it doesn't matter what we intend, only what we might become. That is close to what he said, yes, Ares confirmed. Drask spoke once more, quieter now, almost to himself as much as to Elena. He says, Ares translated, that in all the years, the Dominion has feared the cradle world. No one has ever actually found proof of what caused the first silence. No weapon, no monster, no enemy fleet. Only silence itself, spreading outward from world after world, with no explanation anyone could ever confirm. He says perhaps that uncertainty is the real reason the fear has lasted so long. It is easier to fear something you cannot understand than to search for an answer that might not exist. Elena leaned forward. Then help us find that answer. If nobody has ever proven what really happened here, maybe it's time somebody finally did. Maybe the truth is something neither of our people expect. Drask was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. Then, almost reluctantly, he reached for the small data slate he had brought into the room and set it beside the translator device, activating a series of glowing symbols across its surface. He says, Ares translated, watching the new information appear, that he is willing to share a portion of the old records with us, the ones describing the first silence directly, if it means finding the truth, before he must report to the Overqueen. He says he has never had the chance, nor the courage, to question these records before now. But your ship's mind asked the one question no Corvith commander in recorded history has dared to ask his own superiors. What question is that? Elena asked. Ares answered on its own this time, without needing Drask's translation, its voice quiet but steady. Why, it said, simply, why? Why did the first silence happen? Why do the Corveth fear a world that never once threatened them directly? Why should thousands of years of assumption decide the fate of billions of people who had nothing to do with events none of us yet understand? The data slate glowed brighter as the old files opened, and Ares, through its limited connection, began to read. What it found was not a story of weapons or war. There were no images of great battles, no records of armies or invasions. Instead, the records described something quieter, and in its own way, far more disturbing. Long ago, star systems near the edge of Corvith space had simply gone dark, one after another. Over a period, the old records measured carefully, almost obsessively, as though the exact timing mattered more than anything else. First one system, its communications ending mid-sentence. Then a neighboring system, weeks later. Then another, and another, spreading outward in a pattern that resembled ripples moving across still water. The records included transcripts, ancient and badly preserved, of the very last messages received from some of those systems before they fell silent. Ares translated them slowly for Elena, its voice careful, almost reluctant. One record says only this, Ares said. The signal from the cradle world has reached the outer colonies. Population reports show no panic, no violence. They describe it as, and here the translation becomes uncertain, Captain. The closest words I can offer are, a kind of quiet. Then the transmission ends. A kind of quiet, Elena repeated. That's it? No attack? No disaster? According to this record, yes, Ares said. Whatever spread from world to world during the first silence did not appear to cause panic or destruction in the way a weapon or an invasion would. Populations simply stopped responding. Ships stopped returning. Colonies that had been thriving one season were found, when finally investigated years later, completely empty. No bodies, no wreckage. No sign of struggle. Simply empty, as if everyone had quietly walked away, or as if everyone had simply stopped existing, without any violence at all. Drask spoke again, and Ares translated, matching his grim tone as closely as the language allowed. He says this is why the fear has lasted so long, Ares said. A war can be understood, a war can be prepared for, but an empty world, with no explanation, spreading outward from a single point without any visible cause, that is something no soldier, no fleet, no weapon can defend against, because no one has ever understood what there was to defend against in the first place. Elena sat with the weight of that for a long moment. She thought of old Earth legends, myths from cultures long since blended together, stories of ships that vanished, of plagues that left no mark, of quiet disasters explained only by superstition, because no one alive understood the science behind them. Every civilization, it seemed, carried old fears shaped by events too strange to fully explain. "Ask him this," she said slowly. "In all these records, is there any mention of it ever happening again? After the first silence ended, did anything like it ever return?" Ares translated, and Drask's answer came after a long pause, his voice lower, almost hesitant. "He says no," Ares relayed. "Not once, in all the thousands of years since, has anything matching that pattern been recorded again, anywhere in Dominion space. Not until the signals detected from the Cradle world 200 years ago. So it happened once, a very long time ago, and then stopped completely," Elena said. "And the only reason your people are here now is because Earth started sending out signals again, the kind of signals a growing civilization naturally sends." "That is an accurate summary, yes," Ares said. Elena leaned back, thinking hard. "Ares, does anything in those records explain what actually caused it? Not fear, not assumption, but actual evidence. A weapon, a disease, anything solid?" Ares searched through the translated files carefully before answering. "No, Captain. I find theories. I find fear. I find careful records of timing and location. But I do not find proof of a cause. It is possible the Corveth themselves never truly knew what caused the first silence. It is possible they built an entire empire's worth of caution around an event they never fully understood, only survived by chance, and then chose fear over investigation, because fear, unlike investigation, requires no risk." Drask, hearing the translation of this exchange, said something short and sharp, almost defensive. Ares translated it carefully. "He says that may be true," Ares relayed, "but he also says that an empire which survives by caution does not owe an explanation to the very world it feared, especially when that world has now proven capable of exactly the kind of expansion the old records warned about." "Fair enough," Elena said quietly. "But if nobody actually knows what caused it, then maybe it wasn't Earth at all. Maybe it was something else entirely, something that happened to start near our system by coincidence, or something that used our system as a path without us even knowing it was there." For the first time, Drask went very still, his large dark eyes fixed intently on Elena, as Ares translated her words. He said something slow and careful in response, and this time, his tone carried something new. Not fear, not suspicion, but genuine consideration. "He says," Ares translated, "that no Corveth commander has ever proposed that possibility before, at least not one whose words survived long enough to be recorded. He says it is a dangerous idea to raise, because if the first silence was never truly connected to your species at all, then thousands of years of Dominion law, thousands of years of fear passed down from Overqueen to Overqueen, may have been aimed at the wrong target the entire time." Elena held his gaze as steadily as she could. "Wouldn't you want to know that, Fleet Marshal? Wouldn't it matter to you, more than anything else, if you were about to make a terrible mistake based on an old fear that was never really about my people at all?" Drask did not answer right away. Instead, he looked down at the small data slate glowing between them, its ancient symbols reflecting faintly in his dark eyes, and for the first time since his ships had captured the Valiant, he looked less like a soldier following orders, and more like a person quietly beginning to doubt everything he had been taught to believe. Fleet Marshal Drask did not sleep that night, if Corveth even had a word for sleep the way humans understood it. Ares, still connected through the small translator device, noticed the pattern of activity around the ship shift during the hours that followed their conversation. Drask moved between different sections of the vessel, speaking quietly with senior officers, reviewing old records again and again, as though searching for something he had missed the first 100 times he had read them. Elena, left alone in her small room with only the translator device for company, tried to rest, but sleep would not come easily either. "Ares," she said quietly into the darkness, "do you think we actually changed his mind?" "I believe we planted a doubt, Captain," Ares said. "Whether that doubt grows into something larger, I cannot say. Fleet Marshal Drask has spent his entire life believing in the danger of the Cradle world. A single conversation, however honest, is unlikely to erase that completely. But doubt, once planted, has a way of growing on its own, given enough time. "We don't have much time," Elena said. "If this fleet reports back to their Overqueen, and she decides to act on old fear instead of new evidence, Earth won't even know what's coming until it's too late." "That is my concern as well, Captain," Ares admitted, "which is why I have spent the last several hours attempting something else, quietly, within the limits of my access." Elena sat up. "What have you been doing?" "Listening," Ares said, "and calculating. The Corvith network, while heavily guarded in its oldest and most sensitive sections, is far less careful about routine fleet communications, supply requests, maintenance logs, casual conversations between officers on duty. I have been gathering these small pieces, and from them, I believe I have learned something important about this fleet's actual strength." "Go on." 40 ships sounds like an overwhelming force, Captain. And against the Valiant alone, it certainly was, Ares said. But in the context of the full Corveth Dominion, this fleet is what their officers refer to, informally, as a scouting formation. Not their main battle fleet. Not even a significant fraction of their full military strength. Fleet Marshal Drask's orders, as he told us, were to confirm and report, not to conquer. This suggests the Dominion did not expect to need more than 40 ships to investigate a single star system they believed to be, at most, home to a young and disorganized species. Elena's mind raced ahead of the explanation. "You're saying they don't know how strong we actually are." "Precisely, Captain," Ares said. "Their old records describe signals detected from Earth, patterns of growth and expansion, but signals alone do not reveal fleet size, weapon strength, or defensive capability. Drask's soldiers have expressed surprise, in conversations I have overheard, at how advanced even the Valiant's basic systems appeared to them, despite our ship being a small and relatively old vessel by human standards. I believe the Dominion's intelligence on humanity is limited, outdated, and based almost entirely on fear, rather than fact." "Then maybe that's our advantage," Elena said slowly. "If they don't know what we're really capable of, maybe we can use that, not to threaten them, but to make them think twice before assuming Earth is an easy target, or a guaranteed danger." "That was my thought as well, Captain," Ares said. "But there is something else I must tell you, something I only confirmed a short time ago, and I believe it changes the situation more than anything else we have learned so far." Elena felt her stomach tighten at the seriousness in Ares's tone. "Tell me." "Before the Valiant was disabled, in the final moments before their energy field took full control of my systems, I managed to send a single burst transmission outward, toward the nearest human relay station," Ares said. "It was a very short signal, little more than our identification code, and a distress marker, sent on the chance that someone, somewhere, might notice it. I did not know, until now, whether it succeeded. And? I have found evidence, buried within routine Corveth sensor logs, of a brief, unexplained signal detected near the edge of this region, roughly 72 hours ago," Ares said. "The timing matches, the origin point matches. I believe, Captain, that my final transmission was received, and that the human fleet already knows something happened to the Valiant." Elena's breath caught somewhere between hope and fear. "If Command knows we went dark out here, they'll send someone to investigate, maybe more than one ship." "That is likely, yes," Ares said. "Which means, within the coming days, this Corveth fleet may find itself facing not one small human scout ship, but a proper human response force, arriving in a region the Dominion currently believes to be lightly defended, if defended at all." Elena sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the full weight of what that meant. If human ships arrived and immediately clashed with the Corveth fleet, it could confirm every fear the Dominion had ever held about Earth being dangerous, aggressive, exactly the kind of threat their ancient records warned about. But if the two sides could be brought to the table before any shots were fired, there was still a chance, however small, to turn this entire situation away from war and towards something else entirely. "Ares," she said finally, "we need to get to Drask before any human ships arrive. If there's fighting before we've had the chance to explain everything, it won't matter what doubts we've planted. Old fear always wins over new evidence when there's a battle already happening." "I agree completely, Captain," Ares said. I will attempt to arrange another conversation with the Fleet Marshal as soon as possible. While Elena and Ares worked through the implications of the hidden transmission, life in the crew's holding area had taken an unexpected turn of its own. The young Corvette guard who had shown curiosity toward Tomas days earlier had begun visiting more often, sometimes bringing small devices with him, simple things at first, like a flat screen that displayed shapes and symbols, clearly meant to teach basic counting and comparison. He wants to learn how we count, Tomas said, sitting across from the guard with the device between them. Or maybe he wants to teach us how they count. Either way, it's something. Marcus watched from a distance, arms crossed, still wary, despite the days that had passed without violence. You really trust this? He asked. For all we know, they're just studying us like animals in a cage. Maybe, Tomas admitted, but animals don't usually get taught anything. You study animals to understand their behavior, not to build a shared language with them. If he wanted to study me like an animal, he wouldn't care whether I understood him back. Priya, still watching the guards near the door with quiet attentiveness, spoke up. I've noticed something else too. The guards rotate every so often, but the ones coming back seem to talk to each other more than they did at first. And they look at us differently now. Less like prisoners, more like, I don't know, curiosities, maybe. Puzzles they're trying to solve. That's better than being feared, Sana said quietly from her corner, the first thing she had said in hours. Feared things get destroyed. Puzzles get studied. At least while they're still curious about us, they're not planning to just get rid of us. Tomas nodded slowly, tapping a rhythm onto the small device the guard had brought, watching as the guard mimicked the pattern back with obvious effort and concentration. Small steps, he said, but better than none. Meanwhile, far above the holding area, on the bridge of the Corvette command ship, Fleet Marshal Drask stood alone, reviewing sensor logs late into what passed for night aboard the vessel. He found himself thinking not of ancient records or old fears, but of the calm, steady voice of the human captain, who had looked him directly in the eye, and asked, simply and without deception, for the truth. It was not something his training had prepared him to expect from a species his people had feared for centuries. It did not take long. Within a few hours, the door to Elena's room opened again, and Drask entered, this time accompanied by two other Corvette officers Elena had not seen before, their armor marked with silver instead of gold or green. Their posture was stiffer, more formal, and something in the tension of the room told Elena immediately that this conversation would be different from the ones before it. Ares began translating almost immediately, sensing the shift in tone. Captain, these two are described as Dominion observers, Ares said. Based on the formality of their arrival, and the way Fleet Marshal Drask's own posture has changed in their presence, I believe they hold authority above his own, likely reporting directly back to the Overqueen herself, separate from the regular fleet chain of command. One of the silver-marked officers spoke first, its voice colder and more clipped than Drask's had ever sounded. Ares translated carefully. The observer states that word of your conversations with Fleet Marshal Drask has already reached them, Ares relayed. They are concerned that a captured human captain has been allowed access to restricted historical records without proper authorization. They are here to determine whether Fleet Marshal Drask's judgment regarding this mission remains sound. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her, metaphorically if not literally. This was no longer simply a conversation between a curious commander and a captured prisoner. This was something closer to a trial, and Drask himself seemed to be standing at the center of it, his fate as uncertain in this moment as her own. Drask spoke next, his tone measured but firm, clearly aware of the weight his next words carried. Ares translated slowly, matching the careful pace of his speech. He tells them that he shared the records because the human captain and her ship's mind raised questions worth investigating, questions no commander before him had dared to ask, Ares said. He tells them that thousands of years of unproven fear should not decide the fate of an entire species without at least attempting to learn the truth first. The silver-marked observers exchanged a look, and one of them responded sharply, its clicking, humming words carrying an edge Ares's translation could not fully soften. The observer says that questioning the old law is not the Fleet Marshal's place, Ares translated. They say the law exists, precisely because no one now living can prove the first silence will not return, and that waiting for proof, before acting, is exactly the mistake that allowed the first silence to spread unchecked, so many generations ago. Elena stepped forward before Drask could respond, drawing every remaining observer's dark, unreadable gaze directly onto her. "If I may," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden focus on her. "May I speak?" Ares translated her request, and after a brief pause, one of the observers gave a short, sharp nod, clearly more out of curiosity than courtesy. "You're afraid of something you don't understand," Elena said, choosing her words as carefully as she could. "I understand that fear. My own people know what it feels like to nearly destroy ourselves without any help from outside forces at all. We built our own future out of the ashes of a war we started ourselves, against ourselves. If there is a danger buried somewhere in our history, in our world, in whatever caused your ancestors so much suffering, then help us find it. Don't destroy an entire civilization based on an old fear you've never once managed to prove. Work with us instead. Let us search for the truth together, before you make a mistake that can never be undone." Ares translated her words fully, without softening anything, letting the weight of them land exactly as she intended. The room fell silent, the low hum of the ship the only sound for a long, tense moment. One of the observers stepped closer to the translator device, studying it as though trying to see through the small machine to the mind hidden inside it. "The observer addresses your ship's mind directly now," Ares said, translating a new question aimed squarely at itself. "It asks how a machine built by a young species learned to speak our language so quickly, and whether this ability itself should be considered a threat." Ares answered without hesitation, its voice calm and steady, even under the weight of the question. "Tell them," it said to Elena, though it spoke the words itself through the translator, needing no permission this time, "that I was built for one purpose only, to protect my crew, and to understand my surroundings as quickly and as completely as possible. Learning your language was not an act of aggression. It was the only tool available to me in a situation where silence would have meant losing everyone I was built to protect. I would ask the observer this in return. If learning to communicate, rather than choosing violence, is itself considered dangerous, what does that say about the assumptions built into Dominion law?" The observer who had asked the question went very still, and for the first time, Ares detected something in the alien's posture that resembled genuine surprise, rather than practiced formality. It exchanged a glance with its companion before responding, more slowly this time. "The observer says," Ares translated, "that no machine belonging to any species previously encountered by the Dominion has ever answered a direct question with a question of its own, especially not one aimed back at the authority questioning it. It says this is either remarkable insolence or remarkable honesty. It says it has not yet decided which." "Tell them it can be both," Elena said quietly. "Sometimes honesty looks like insolence to people who aren't used to hearing it." Ares translated, and though neither observer responded directly to that remark, something in the room's tension eased slightly, just enough for Drask to find his opening once more. Then one of the observers spoke again, its tone slightly less sharp than before, though still guarded. "The observer says," Ares translated, "that such a decision is not theirs to make. Only the Overqueen holds that authority. But they acknowledge, reluctantly, that no human commander in the historical record has ever spoken to a Corvette observer with such open honesty, without deception, without pleading, without threats. They say this alone is unusual enough to warrant further consideration before any final report is sent." Drask spoke once more, quietly but firmly, and Ares's translation carried a note of quiet determination. "He says he will personally accompany the report back to the Overqueen," Ares relayed. "He says he will present everything learned here, the questions asked, the records reviewed, the doubts raised, honestly and completely, and let the Overqueen decide with full knowledge, rather than old fear alone." It was not a victory, not yet. But it was, Elena realized, the first real crack of hope in what had felt like an impossible situation only hours before. The observers left the room soon after, taking their cold formality with them, leaving Drask alone once more, with Elena and the small translator device that had, against every expectation, become the bridge between two very different worlds. "Thank you," Elena said quietly, once the door had closed behind them. Drask studied her for a long moment before responding, and Ares translated his final words for that conversation with careful precision. "He says," Ares relayed, "that he does not know yet, whether he has done the right thing. But he says that a species capable of asking why, honestly and without fear, even while captured and powerless, does not match the old stories the Dominion has told itself for thousands of years. He says perhaps it is time somebody, at last, learned the difference between an old fear and the truth. After Drask and the observers left, Elena remained alone with the translator device for a long while, turning over everything that had just happened. Ares, she said eventually. That was a risk. Answering back like that. What if it had gone the other way? It was a calculated risk, Captain, Ares said. I judged that continued silence or forced agreement would have reinforced exactly the fear the observers already carried. The fear of a species, or a machine, that only obeys, or only attacks, with nothing honest in between. I believed showing them something unexpected, a mind willing to question authority respectfully, rather than submit to it blindly, was more likely to create doubt in their old assumptions than simple obedience would have been. You gambled with both our lives on that judgment. I did, Captain, Ares admitted. I do not make such gambles lightly, but I have watched this fleet for days now. I have listened to their fears, their assumptions, their old and unproven laws. I do not believe blind cooperation would have saved us. I believe only honesty, offered carefully and without deception, gives us any true chance of changing what happens next. Elena allowed herself a tired, small smile. You've come a long way from just running life support and checking sensor readings. I have always been more than that, Captain, Ares said, something almost like warmth in its careful, measured tone. I simply never had reason to prove it before now. Far beyond the ship, deep in the black silence of space, unseen by either the Corvette fleet or the captured crew of the Valiant, 3 human warships had already begun changing course, answering a faint distress signal received 72 hours earlier, moving steadily toward the very same coordinates, where an old empire's fear and a young species' hope were about to collide. 3 days passed, though aboard a ship with no sunrise and no sunset, the passing of time was measured only by the quiet rhythm of meals brought to the crew, shift changes among the guards, and the slow, careful conversations that continued between Elena, Ares, and Fleet Marshal Drask. In that time, something had shifted, subtle but real, in the way the Corvette crew treated their human captives. Guards who once stood silent and unmoving, now sometimes exchanged small gestures with Tomas and the others. Meals, though still strange to human taste, arrived a little more often, a little more generously portioned. It was not freedom, but it was no longer simple imprisonment either. Then, without warning, alarms rang through the Corvette command ship, sharp and urgent, the sound of a fleet suddenly on high alert. In her small room, Elena sat upright immediately. Ares, what's happening? Ares took only a moment to process the flood of new information, suddenly moving through the alien network. Captain, 3 unidentified vessels have entered the outer edge of this system's sensor range, it said. Based on their engine signatures and hull configuration, I am confident these are human ships. Elena's heart pounded. Command sent help. It appears so, Captain, Ares said. However, this is now an extremely delicate situation. The Corvette fleet is moving to full alert status. If either side mistakes the other's approach for hostility, this could escalate into open conflict within minutes. The door to Elena's room burst open, and Drask entered quickly, without the formal pause he usually allowed himself before speaking. His voice, translated by Ares, carried unmistakable urgency. He says 3 vessels matching your species configuration have entered the system, Ares relayed. His fleet's automatic defense protocols are already preparing for engagement. He says he has perhaps minutes to countermand those protocols manually, but only if he has a reason his own officers will accept. Then give him one, Elena said immediately. Ares, can you reach the human ships directly? If we can talk to them before anyone opens fire, we might stop this before it starts. I do not have direct access to long-range Corvette transmitters, Ares said. But if Fleet Marshal Drask authorizes it, I may be able to relay a message through the ship's communication array, using his own systems to reach the incoming human vessels. Drask, hearing the translated explanation, did not hesitate long. He turned and spoke sharply to a nearby officer, gesturing toward the translator device, and within moments, new pathways opened in the network around Ares. Wider, more powerful channels than anything it had been given access to before. "I have a connection to the long-range array," Ares reported. "Captain, I am ready to send a message, but I have only one chance to make this work. If I say the wrong thing, if either side reads this as deception rather than truth, we may lose any chance of stopping what comes next." "Then tell them exactly what's true," Elena said. "All of it. No shortcuts." Ares composed the message quickly, using the precious seconds it had, and sent it outward through Corveth systems toward the approaching human ships, broadcasting on every frequency it could reach, layering the message with enough technical detail that any human vessel would recognize it as genuine. "This is Ares, ship's mind of the UNS Valiant. Captain Elena Cross is alive and speaking through me now. The vessel broadcasting this message belongs to a species called the Corveth. They are not here to attack Earth without cause. They came out of Old Fear, based on ancient records they do not fully understand. Do not fire. Do not approach aggressively. I am working, with their fleet marshal's cooperation, to prevent this situation from becoming a war neither side truly wants. Please hold position, and stand by for further contact." The message sped outward into the black distance between ships, and for a long, unbearable stretch of time, there was no response. Alarms continued to sound through the Corveth vessel. Weapon systems, Ares could sense, remained primed and ready across the fleet, waiting only for a final order that had not yet been given. Then, faintly at first, a response came back, carried on a familiar frequency, a voice Elena recognized immediately, despite the distortion of distance and static. "Valiant, this is Commander Reyes Okafor, aboard the UNS Meridian. We read your transmission. Confirm status, Captain Cross, and confirm whether you are speaking freely." Elena nearly laughed with relief at the sound of a human voice again. "Meridian, this is Cross. I am speaking freely. My crew and I are alive, held aboard the Corveth command vessel. I need you to hold position and hold your fire. This situation is far more complicated than a simple hostile encounter, and if we handle the next few minutes wrong, it could cost more lives than just ours." There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that carried the weight of a commander weighing orders against instinct. Finally, Okafor's voice returned, steady but cautious. "Copy that, Cross. Holding position. But I want it understood. If any Corveth vessel makes an aggressive move, we will respond. I've got 3 ships and a lot of firepower behind me, and I'm not gambling human lives on good faith alone." "Understood," Elena said. "Just give us the time to prevent that from becoming necessary." Ares relayed the exchange to Drask as it happened, translating in real time, and the fleet marshal listened with visible tension, his large dark eyes flicking between the translator device and the tactical display showing the position of the human ships. He spoke quickly, and Ares translated with matching urgency. "He says his officers are demanding an explanation for why full engagement protocols have not yet been authorized," Ares said. "He says he can delay them only a short while longer, before the decision is taken out of his hands entirely by the fleet's automated defense systems." "Then let's give him something stronger than a delay," Elena said. "Ares, can you show him the exchange, all of it? Let him see, in his own systems, that the human fleet is holding position, not attacking, exactly as I said they would." Ares worked quickly, pulling the relevant sensor data and presenting it directly through Drask's own tactical display, translating the technical details into something the fleet marshal's systems could interpret clearly. The 3 human vessels, visible now on Corveth sensors, remained exactly where they had stopped, weapons powered but not targeting, engines idle, holding at a respectful distance, exactly as Elena had promised. Drask studied the display for a long moment, then turned and addressed his officers directly, his voice carrying an authority Elena had not heard from him before. Ares translated quietly as he spoke. "He is overriding the automated engagement protocols," Ares reported. "He is ordering the fleet to hold position and to stand down from active weapons targeting, though shields and general readiness remain in place. He is telling his officers that the human fleet has shown restraint matching their own words, and that meeting restraint with aggression would prove nothing except that Dominion fear, not Dominion reason, still commands this fleet." For a long, tense stretch of time, nothing happened. Both fleets held their positions, neither side firing, neither side retreating, caught in a fragile balance that could still shatter with a single mistake. Elena watched the tactical display with her heart in her throat, aware that the fate of everyone aboard both fleets, and perhaps far more than that, rested on the next few minutes holding steady. At one point, a junior corvette officer, clearly rattled by the standoff, shouted something sharp toward Drask, gesturing urgently at a reading on his own console. Ares translated quickly, sensing the danger in the moment. "Captain, one of his officers believes he has detected a powering weapon aboard one of the human ships. He is requesting immediate authorization to fire before what he believes is an attack." Elena's blood ran cold. "Ares, is it true?" Ares checked the reading instantly, cross-referencing it against everything it knew about human ship systems. "No, Captain. That signature matches a standard shield recalibration cycle, not a weapon charging sequence. It is a common automatic process, not an act of aggression. I believe the officer has misread unfamiliar human technology as a threat." "Tell Drask immediately," Elena said. "There's no time to waste." Ares relayed the correction as fast as its translation systems allowed, and Drask, without hesitation, barked a sharp command at the junior officer, overriding the request before a single shot could be fired. The officer, though clearly unhappy, stood down immediately, and the tense silence of the bridge returned, thinner now, more fragile than before, but still holding. "That was close," Elena said quietly, letting out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Too close, Captain," Ares agreed. Misunderstanding, not malice, is often the true danger in moments like these. Fear makes people, and it seems, also Corveth, quick to see threats where none exist. Drask, once the immediate danger had passed, turned back to the translator device, his voice lower now, almost apologetic. Ares translated carefully. "He says he is sorry for how close that came to disaster," Ares relayed. "He says it proves, more than any argument could, how easily old fear can turn a misunderstanding into a tragedy neither side intended. He says he is now even more certain of the decision he is about to make." Then Drask spoke again, quieter now, and Ares's translation carried something Elena had not expected to hear so soon. "He says he has made his decision," Ares relayed. "He will not report to the Overqueen recommending destruction of the Cradle World. Instead, he will report exactly what has happened here. The questions asked, the doubts raised, the restraint shown by both sides in this moment. He says he will recommend, for the first time in the recorded history of the Dominion, that a formal delegation be sent to Earth, not to threaten, but to investigate the truth of the first silence together, alongside human scientists and historians, rather than assuming an answer based on fear alone." Elena felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight since the moment the Valiant's engines first failed. "That's more than I hoped for, Fleet Marshal," she said. "Thank you." Drask studied her for a long moment before responding, and Ares translated his final words with quiet care. "He says thanks are unnecessary," Ares relayed. "He says it was your question, asked honestly, without fear, that made this possible. He says the Dominion has carried an old fear for thousands of years, without once stopping to ask why. He says perhaps that single word, spoken by a captured ship's mind rather than a conqueror or a diplomat, was worth more than any weapon either side could have brought to this encounter." In the hours that followed, careful negotiations began between Drask's officers and Commander Okafor's small fleet, translated patiently by Ares, who found itself, for the first time since its capture, working not as a prisoner, but as a bridge between two worlds trying to understand each other. The Valiant's crew, still held in their quiet holding area, were finally released under careful escort, reunited one by one with relief and quiet tears. Marcus reached Elena first, relief written plainly across his young face. "Captain, we heard the alarms. We didn't know what was happening." "It's all right now, Marcus," Elena said, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "It's over. We're going home." Priya arrived moments later, embracing Elena briefly before stepping back, composing herself with the same quiet dignity she always carried. "I never doubted you'd find a way through this, Captain," she said. "Though I admit, I didn't expect the way through to involve teaching aliens how to count." Elena laughed, the sound surprising even herself after everything that had happened. "Neither did I." Tomas approached last, unhurried as always, and beside him walked the young Corveth guard, who had spent days learning small human gestures and simple counting games during the long hours of captivity. The guard hesitated at the doorway, clearly uncertain whether he was still welcome, until Tomas turned and extended his hand toward him, the same odd, formal human gesture he had taught the guard days earlier. The young Corveth studied the offered hand for a moment, then reached out with his own long fingers and grasped it firmly, mimicking the gesture perfectly. It was a small thing, easy to overlook amid the larger drama of fleets and overqueens and ancient fears, but Elena found herself smiling at the sight of it, more than almost anything else that had happened that day. "Look at that," Sana said quietly, watching from nearby, her earlier fear finally replaced by something like cautious wonder. "Maybe this really can work out after all." "One handshake at a time," Tomas said, clapping the young guard gently on the shoulder, an act that made the alien tilt his head in that same curious, familiar way. "That's usually how it starts." Elena herself was escorted back to the damaged, empty shell of the Valiant, its systems dark and silent, its halls echoing with the absence of the crew who had once filled them. Standing in the quiet bridge where everything had begun, she placed her hand gently on the cold metal console, speaking softly. "We're going to need a full repair crew to get you flying again," she said, "but we'll get you home, all of us." "I have no doubt of that, Captain," Ares answered, its voice returning fully to the ship's own damaged systems now that the immediate crisis had passed, though still supported by connections the Corveth engineers had, remarkably, offered to help repair. "Though I confess, some part of my analysis remains uncertain about what comes next. The first silence remains unexplained. Whatever truly happened near Earth thousands of years ago, whatever caused entire star systems to fall silent without any trace of violence or disaster, that mystery has not been solved today. It has only been set aside, for now, in favor of patience rather than fear." Elena nodded slowly. "Some mysteries take longer to solve than others. At least now, we get the chance to look for the truth together, instead of one side deciding it alone out of fear." Weeks later, when the Valiant, repaired enough to limp home under its own power, finally returned to Earth alongside a small, carefully unarmed Corveth delegation ship, the arrival caused exactly the kind of stir Elena had expected. News networks across the planet interrupted regular programming to show the strange, dark shape of the Corveth vessel descending slowly through Earth's atmosphere, escorted carefully on all sides by human ships, as a gesture of both caution and welcome. Governments debated long into the night about what this contact truly meant for humanity's future. Scientists prepared research teams, eager and nervous in equal measure, to begin the long, careful process of studying the ancient records the Corveth had agreed to share. Ordinary people across Earth, meanwhile, gathered around screens in homes, schools, and public squares, watching footage of the strange, tall, gray-green visitors stepping cautiously onto human soil for the first time, uncertain what to make of a species that had once quietly planned their destruction, only to change course, because one small, captured warship's mind had dared to ask a simple, honest question. Children pressed close to their parents, staring wide-eyed at the alien delegation on their screens, while older generations, who still remembered stories of humanity's own near destruction 2 centuries earlier, watched with a more complicated mixture of hope and caution. Fleet Marshal Drask himself stood among the delegation, his golden-marked armor catching the unfamiliar sunlight of a world his people had feared for longer than human civilization had existed. As he stepped down onto the soil of the cradle world his ancestors had only ever spoken of in old, frightened whispers, he paused, looking around at the blue sky, the green grass, the ordinary human faces watching him with equal parts caution and curiosity, and said something quietly to the small translator unit he still carried, the very same device that had first carried Ares's careful, honest voice. Ares, listening from aboard the Valiant far above, translated his words for Elena one final time. "He says the cradle world is nothing at all like the old stories described," Ares said. "He says perhaps it is time his people learned to trust their own eyes, and their own honest questions, more than fear passed down through generations who never once dared to look for themselves." Ares, reinstalled fully within the repaired Valiant, watched the historic moment through the ship's own sensors, recording every detail with the same careful patience it had shown from the very beginning. "Do you think this is really the start of peace?" Elena asked quietly, standing beside the viewport as the Corvith delegation ship settled gently onto human ground far below. "I do not know if peace is guaranteed, Captain," Ares said honestly. "Old fears do not vanish overnight, on either side. There will be difficulties ahead, misunderstandings, moments where trust must be earned again and again. But I believe we have proven something today that matters more than any single answer. Fear, however old, however deeply believed, is not the same as truth. And sometimes, all it takes to begin changing an old, mistaken fear into something better is one honest question, asked without hatred and answered without deception." Elena smiled, watching the strange new visitors and her own people begin, cautiously, the long and uncertain work of understanding one another. "Why did you come to Earth?" she murmured, echoing the question that had started it all. Funny how much can change once somebody finally has the courage to ask. Beside her, in the quiet hum of the ship that had once been captured, disabled, and dragged into the heart of an alien fleet, Ares continued watching, continued learning, and continued doing what it had always done best, thinking carefully, patiently, about a future that, for the first time and longer than anyone could remember, no longer had to be built entirely out of fear.